So we need to find a way, and politicians have never tried to chime in on this and try to have a symposium or something to try to relate to our young people and tell them, look, politics is not a bad thing.
Right.
We have bad politicians. We have bad people.
Sure.
And the thing I always tell my people, and I'll end with this in this segment, whenever you hear the opposition get up and they are just trampling all over something, you look deep. It is some ground that the government is making, right? Mm-hmm. They never get up and holler unless the government is making some ground that they think that the government would get reelected.
Right.
And anything that they see the government has done that would get them reelected, then they jump up and down and scream and call the governor and call commissions and investigations. And anytime you see that going on, it's something that the people would have benefited from.
Right. Well,
that's my opinion.
Right. Well, it's important to note at this point that what's happening here in the Cayman Islands, the dynamics of politics here in Cayman are really no different than anywhere else. I mean, we're interested in Cayman because this is where we live and this is our home. But at the end of the day, if you go to America, you go to Canada, you go to Grenada, you go to England, I mean, it's politics all over. We do have the added benefit, though, I would say, of having a small community. And I find that I feel and I believe as a Caymanian woman that there will be less things such as corruption and bad things really happening because we are so connected to our politicians. I mean, where else in the world can you call the premier of the country and have a conversation with him if you're the average person on the street? Right. Where else in the world can you go and talk to the MLAs like they're your friends? Yeah. I don't know of anywhere else. I mean, just in neighboring Caribbean countries, you don't ever see those people unless you go to their office or to, and even at that, you're at a, you got to stand back.
It's so good you said that, Donna, because just take, for instance, the District of Georgetown. People think because there's only 6,000 people on the voters list or thereabout, that's the only people that Ellio and Mike, as only two lonely UDP individuals, would have to deal with. There's 25,000 people thereabout. And there's about 15,000 people that live in Bordentown, I do think, but only 3,000 on the voters list.
Right.
So there's, you're not going to go to someone's house and says, "Are you on the voters list?" That's inhumane. So you're going to try to deal with everyone on a one-to-one basis and try to address their concerns as a citizen of this country.
Right, exactly. Mr. Solomon?
Well, Donna, I suppose I would start first of all by saying that I'm appreciative of the fact that any time that you give any complaints about your job, generally, and definitely if you're a politician, you're probably going to be castigated. So let me just put the caveat up front that I'm simply doing this in terms of response to your question.
Okay.
But I think that you raise a very good point when you talk about the fact that, where else in the world do you get that sort of proximity where you can actually perhaps go by and visit the premier's residence, or you can go down the road. I had people came to my door just today and they come there every day, regardless of what those requests are. And that proximity creates some challenges, but it's also a good thing. But I'm afraid that if we don't learn from our neighbors, and that's whether they're a few miles away or they're thousands of miles away, then we're going to repeat a lot of the same problems.
Right.
Like, for example, just the other day, someone went into the MLA office and they made a threat that they were pretty much going to kill certain persons. And when you actually look at that, what is that going to do? And I've heard it even on the talk shows where it seems almost as if the hosts of the program or other persons are almost trying to get persons to take a very negative view about politicians to the point that, especially when you consider all of the situations that's occurring now with the economy, etc., that someone may actually do something that either threatens or actually perhaps causes injury or perhaps even loss of life to a politician. It's a reality. Right. And once those sort of things starts to happen, that proximity that you've just spoke about with so much pride will disappear. Because a lot of those neighbors that we talk about where you don't have that proximity, that closeness to your politician, they probably had that proximity to some degree at some point in time as well, until someone shot someone, and the list goes on. We now have individuals, for example, like the Attorney General, who the taxpayers of this country are probably going to be paying a significant amount of money, and I'm not talking to put him in a bad light, but you pay $250,000 a year to guard that person. If you don't put a stop to that, you'll be paying $250,000 per head in the LA, which is probably going to be an additional $3 million to guard all your elected officials because someone's threatening them or someone actually shot one, whatever. So we need to take a step back. And in terms of answering your question about the day-to-day life, I think you can add that into the equation. But also, I think that there are other challenges. There are challenges, and I'll perhaps start by saying this. Years ago, I said to my cousin, when I used to work at Computer Services, I said to him, it's one thing if you're out there doing the shoveling, and there's another thing if you're supervising, and there needs to be an appreciation for both jobs. But I tried to describe to him at the time that once you're finished with your shoveling, you can sort of put the shovel down, call it the end of the day, and go home, get some sleep, and come back the following day. But the person who's managing or supervising doesn't really get that pleasure. He still has to check, or he or she has to check, did they put the shovel away? Then they have to go home and think about what the schedule is going to be tomorrow, wondering if someone's going to show up. So there's a lot more mind work that's actually taking place, and it really stops you sometime from sleeping.
Right.
Because a lot of times, if you really care about the country, like last night, I woke up at 1:30 and I didn't get back to sleep because something may come to your mind, whether positive or negative, and you say, wow, I just thought of something. I think I have a solution to a particular problem, and you can't sleep. You want to write it down, and you can't. And I've sat there waiting and praying for the sun to come up so I can make phone calls because it would be ridiculous to call people at 3:30 in the morning. So if you really care about your country, you really want to do something, there's a lot of reward into it, because nothing better than when I brought some of these motions, Donna, actually see it come to fruition, like the pensions, and actually see people who just, I met a lady just yesterday in the bank. She said, I have a house today, Mr. Solomon, because of you and because of Scotiabank. So that gives you an amount of joy that is inexplicable. You cannot explain it. But there's challenges to that everyday job. You have persons that come to you with needs, again, whether it might be some short-term financial assistance or solutions that you may not even have that solution at the time. And it really takes a tax on you because you want to do something to solve those problems. It is a very interesting job. I don't want to discourage anyone, but you definitely have to be, all your belts and braces have to be ready if you're going to enter into this particular job. I can assure you.
All right.
And let me just pick you up on the point when you talked about encouraging young persons. I perhaps should throw out my number if there's anyone who is interested in knowing and learning more about politics. I'm quite happy to share my number with them. They can text me or call me. Happy to meet with them privately as well.
All right. There you go. All right. Talking about the motions that you've brought and that have been supported by your colleague, Mr. Seymour, the pensions withdrawal amendment for the private sector. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. That's been very successful in you bringing that forth, even though I know you've taken your knocks from, the pension companies and so forth. But let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, you always tend to take more knocks from the perhaps the opposition, but that's expected. As my colleague said, I think if anyone feels you're going to gain a little political ground, they're going to try to knock you down a few inches. Well, first of all, let me give public thanks again to my colleague, Mr. Dwayne Seymour, because he's been one of those persons that's been very supportive in terms of a lot of the motions that I brought. One of the things about getting involved in politics is the misconception that people get into it. I remember, or one of the good ways that we actually convey the experience of getting involved with politics, particularly to young persons, is the youth parliament that we tend to have every year. And Mr. Dwayne Seymour has been very instrumental in doing some of those things. I won't take away his thunder, so I'm sure he'll chat about it a little bit later on. But I remember one young man walking in actually saying, he said, I don't want to get involved. Politics is all corrupt, and I think parties are bad. So I sat him down and I said, okay, let me tell you something now. You want to do something good for the country? He says, absolutely. I said, okay, fine. I want you to go ahead. Just come up with a motion very quickly on something that you'd like to do. A couple of minutes later, he says, I have one. I said to him, okay, fine. The rules of the House are that you have to have someone in this room to support you if you want to get that motion passed. He then turned to, so I said, turn to your colleagues and ask them who's going to support you. He turned around, he asked everyone kind of gave him that numb look like, I'm not sure if I want to support that one. And after about 5 minutes of grasping for air, finally one person said, okay, I'll go ahead and support it just so we can move on from this exercise. Then finally the person supported the motion, and we went through the motion, and I kind of stopped it there, and I said, let me ask you something now. If you're a parliamentarian, and tomorrow you're back in the Legislative Assembly, it's not your motion now, and it's this young man's motion, the one who just supported you, do you think that unless he was bringing something absolutely ridiculous, do you think that you would support him? He said, absolutely. I said, well, you've just got a friend in Parliament now. and you start adding 3, 4 of them, you can call it a team, a group, a part, it doesn't matter. You have to work with other people if you're going to
Right.
get something accomplished. This whole argument about independent, that's fine. You can talk independently. You can sleep independently. You can die independently. You're born independently,
Right.
but you won't accomplish anything in the parliament independently.
Right.
So when we went through that little short exercise, he was then able to walk away saying, with a greater appreciation for this misconceptions that's laid around in public about what you can do and what you can accomplish. You know, so I just sort of throw that out as just one of those things. But it's an interesting job and encourage people to get involved.
Right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about your pension withdrawal amendment.
Yeah, so my pension withdrawal amendment.
For the private sector.
Well, politician missing an opportunity to blow his trumpet. But on the pension side, Donna, I think that one of the first recognitions that I have, and I had this for quite some time, is the fact that our forefathers went overseas and they worked in the seas. Our mothers primarily stayed at home and men into the country, did what had to be done, and the fathers went out and actually sent that money back home. It is that combination of events, because you can't leave one without the other. Those combination of the stay home and the sending money back home helped us to build a country that we have now as the 5th largest financial industry in the world, one of the best places for tourism. I think we're pretty much number one on one of the lists that eludes me at this point. So tremendous accomplishments, and it starts because of those small little things that was done correctly. One of the issues that I had general with our pension is the issue that our monies is being sent overseas. If you looked at the survey, the census for 2009, I think it was, 1999, it would have said that approximately $775 million was in collection and salaries. That means that approximately every year, $75 million was going into pension accounts into this country. And where was those monies going? $75 million is going to the United States, to Asia, to Europe, to help build their infrastructure. It could be to build homes. It could be to build sewage, telecommunication lines. Why are we spending hard-earned taxpayers' money in this country, Caymanian money, residents alike, and sending it overseas to build somebody's infrastructure?
Right.
I have serious issues with that. I say we need to bring the money back home and spend it within our local economy to get things going. And now, I appreciated that there were a lot of steps to get all of those things done to where United States has stock markets, programs that can filter down straight through to small businesses. So I wanted to take the first step in the right direction. Just under the previous administration, there was a loss, I think, of perhaps just one registered loss of over $200 million in pension accounts. And $200 million may sound small, but that's a lot of money that people right now in this country could be using at this very difficult economic time. But because no one did anything about it, that $200 million was lost. People who had shares in the AIGs of the world, it was up to $1,390 something a share. It dropped as low as $8, just to give you an indication of the kind of losses people were having to sustain. So I wanted to find a first step in the right direction. To say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step.
Right.
Well, the first step is give me a simple way that we can start to give our Caymanians back some of their money and have them invest in their own infrastructure. And that conservative, innovative approach was to be able to say, give them access to their pension as much as $35,000 that they could purchase a piece of land, build a house, buy a house, or to make that final payment towards their mortgage and actually get home ownership. I'm proud to say that that number now, I think, was 180 something persons who have already benefited just in the last 6 or 7 months in terms of that pension.
Wow.
And so when you think of 187 persons, 187 families that now have a piece of land, a home, or whether building, buying, or paying off that mortgage, as a result of that, is tremendous. The calculations, and let me just give you why we talk about 35,000 in terms of deposit means that just about anything that you withdraw, you're going to have to pay that 10% to the bank. So a person putting in a $35,000 deposit would be able to get as much as $350,000 mortgage.
Right.
So that was sort of the thinking that would definitely be an affordable home for the average Caymanian who really wants to get themselves ahead. So when we actually did the calculations, it means that if you actually withdrew, for example, a total of $26 million, you could pretty much bet that the $26 million that was withdrawn from pension was only 10% of your spend. So you'd actually have to multiply the $26 million by 10, get $260 million, for example.
Right.
And the estimate right now of the last figures that we had is that at least a minimum of $85 million has gone into the Cayman Islands economy over the last 7 to 9 months as a result of that private sector pension motion. That's $85 million going to help buy food, clothes, houses, land, not going to build Asia, not going to build Europe, and definitely not building America or another country.
Right.
I think it's a tremendous accomplishment, and I thank my government for supporting it, and I'm now pushing to see if I can get the same thing now for the civil service as I was able to accomplish for the private sector.
Is this for a time? Is this particular pension withdrawal, is it just for a time, for a particular time, or is it ongoing?
Well, let me say that it is no specific time limit in terms of how long it's going to be. It's in perpetuity pretty much, because unless you have another administration that comes in and cancels that particular law,
okay,
then it's good to go. You're not going to lose it. And I think it's important to stress as well, there's been programs in the past that talks about first-time homeowners or first-time buyer. This is not a first-time buyer program. Mm-hmm. Once you're a person that is a non-current homeowner, I made it non-current homeowner because you could have a situation where someone owned a home, but maybe they had a divorce.
Right.
And so they will not qualify as a first-time buyer, but they're now a non-current homeowner. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're a non-current homeowner, you can use it to buy land, mm-hmm, or to build a house or buy a house. Mm-hmm. For those persons who own a home, you can use it up to $35,000 to make that final payment on your mortgage, which means if it's just a standard family of a husband and wife, that would be 35 times 2. That's a total of 70,000. Mm-hmm. If you actually have a child or 2 children on the title, then you can multiply those 35,000 by 2, 3, 4, or 5, whatever that number is.
Right.
Significant number of persons have benefited. I'll give you 2 specific scenarios. I had an elderly lady who comes in to my apartment, again, visiting me. She came inside. She was pretty much left with about $50,000 left to pay on her mortgage.
Wow.
And she had some of those monies, and her son was willing to step up to the plate. She said, Ellio, when I pass away, I'm going to leave this house for my son anyway. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that pension motion, he was able to be put on the title of the land, and they were both able to go down and draw the respective amounts, one 35 and the other about 15 or whatever it was, and make that mom and that son a very happy family.
Wow.
You know, and to know that the stress is gone, no longer a mortgage to pay, and she has a home, and she has the privilege of knowing that when that day finally comes, that the clock stops ticking, she can say, I can pass this on to my son without a shadow of doubt. Mm-hmm. And those sort of things, I don't know about anyone else, but it helps me to sleep very good at night.
Right.
Except for when I'm awake and thinking about some other idea.
Mr. Seymour, I'm going to come back to you in just a second on that issue. Right now, we're going to take a break here on Vibe 98.9. Thank you, as always, for joining us for Talk with the Nation, and please continue to do so in about 2 minutes.
Talk with the Nation, presented by the Honorable McKeeva Bush, returns on Vibe FM.
All right, welcome back to the show. You are tuning in to Talk with the Nation, the show presented by the Honorable Premier of the Cayman Islands, Mr. McKeeva Bush. With me in studio are MLAs Ellio Solomon and Dwayne Seymour, and they're talking about a life in politics as well as the many motions and that they've brought to the Legislative Assembly to have their colleagues peruse and pass, as well as the ones that they've supported as well. Before we went to the break, we were talking about the pension withdrawal amendment that was brought and was approved and what have you for the private sector. Mr. Solomon alluded to the fact that he is going to try to do the same thing for civil service as well, civil servants out there. If you're listening in, you know, it could be something that you can enjoy or take advantage of in the near future. Before we went to the break, though, Mr. Seymour wanted to actually chime in a little bit on this pension withdrawal amendment. Mr. Seymour, you want to go ahead?
Oh, Donna, just to say, you know, when Ellio approached me with this motion, you know, we normally get down to the meat of things and really have a hearty discussion in terms of what are we trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. You know, when we bring a motion, what is the final outcome? And when I saw that he was trying to achieve that, one of this government's main mantras was to try to help people own a home. Mm-hmm. And I know how important that was, Donna, in terms of trying to own a home, because I remember when I tried many times at the bank trying to apply for a loan, working on the salary that I was working at the time. And I would come up sometimes 4,000 short of what I qualified for, or 8,000 short.
Right.
And, you know, it was just, you know, sad for a couple of days knowing that you couldn't qualify and you did all you could and you try to be prudent in terms of not having any loans, and still you couldn't get a house. And I'm always encouraging anything that I can do to because we had the housing trust program also that Councillor Ellio also spearheads in terms of affordable houses, and that's something that we can talk about a little later. But we saw this as another way, and we wanted not just one avenue for Caymanians to be able to achieve owning a home, a piece of that dream that all Caymanians deserve to have. And whatever I could do to support my colleague Ellio in terms of bringing that motion forward, I was elated in terms of finding another way to be able to have Caymanians own a home.
Right.
That was my motivation for supporting the motion.
Right. Well, I'm sure that you have some folks from your district as well that were able to take advantage of that, and Caymanians across the Cayman Islands. Let's talk a little bit about jobs for Caymanians only. This is an interesting one. Mr. Solomon, you want to address that motion that you brought?
Well, I'll get you to guide me right back to it, but I just have to give the plug on the civil service pension and just encourage those civil servants. I know that many of them are not going to be publicly vociferous on the issue, but they still have a tremendous degree of say on any issue that happens in this country. They are voters nevertheless. So I want them to, I just want to encourage them to everyone to speak to anyone that they meet, but particularly their representatives, and let them know to lend support for the civil service pension motion, because I believe what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and I think that the civil service should be given the same arguable rights and opportunities that we have afforded to those persons in the private sector. And then I think anyone who tries to shortchange them or curtail of those particular abilities is doing them a serious disfavor. So I want to encourage those civil servants to step up and speak out about the issue.
Okay.
On the issue of jobs for Caymanians, I know that, again, that was one of the issues that you've had the opposition rearing arms about. I think they were trying to make it sound almost as if I was speaking down to Caymanians. But let me just say that I believe that, first and foremost, when I checked last, we are in the Cayman Islands. And if you actually look at other countries, and not that we should have to refer to other countries just to give ourselves some sense of validation, but unfortunately that's the way it is. But if you go to United Kingdom and United States, there are specific jobs in those countries that are reserved for citizens of those countries, particularly when it comes to the civil service. One of the things I've always said is that, you have those persons who have a natural fear when it comes to the issue of immigration. Well, am I going to be completely overrun by foreigners and a host of things? And I think that we need to have a little bit of a compromise, because we're always going to need transient workers. We need to encourage good immigration, because through those policies, through those numbers, are we going to be able to help make Cayman Islands a good growth economy that we need. But we cannot do that without putting on the other side of that seesaw a tremendous degree of strength in our own Caymanian people to be able to maintain ownership. And I'm very serious about those issues of ownership. So you've seen things like the affordable homes, you've seen things like in terms of the pension motion for land and for persons purchasing homes there. And then again, when we talk about ownership, it's also about the position that you hold and the decisions that you can actually make. And so I brought this motion saying jobs for Caymanians only, both for public and for private sector. I'm proud to say that right now, I spoke with the minister just a few days ago, and it seems very much that we may actually have that legislation coming, the amendment to the immigration law, specifying creating a schedule. So what will happen in terms of the legislation is that there will be a blank sheet of paper, let's call that blank sheet of paper a schedule, and it will allow Cabinet today and onwards in the future, once that law is passed, to be able to add any particular title or job to that particular schedule. And so, for example, they may pen the line that the chief immigration officer has to be a job for Caymanians only. And just so that we're not in any way at all thinking it's complete novel in Cayman Islands, we have our elected officials right now which have to be Caymanians only. I don't think it should be reserved just for politicians. It has to be other jobs as well. We have the deputy governor, which is a job for Caymanians only. So I believe that there are many persons in this community that share the view that there are certain jobs both in the public sector as well as the private sector that perhaps should be reserved for our people in terms of those decision-making positions. And I've gained some support. As I've said, my colleague here has supported me with it. I've gained the support of my other colleagues, and it seems like we may actually have legislation as early as November for jobs for Caymanians only.
Okay, I'm just going to speak quickly to our listeners out there. The phone lines are now open. You can call us at 946-9898 with your questions or your comments. I just ask that you keep them brief. If I see that you're going on a little bit too long, I'm afraid we're going to have to cut you off, but we will get your answers to your questions as well as, any discussion surrounding your comments. Again, that number to call, 946-9898. Now, going back to Mr. Solomon and talking about the jobs for Caymanians only, are you thinking about particular industries? I think our listeners out there may want a little bit more information on this particular.
It would be listed a restricted category of work. So, for example, when I give the area as a chief immigration officer as an example, it would say that the cabinet then has decided that that particular key position is a position that should be reserved for someone who is a Caymanian only.
Okay.
You may very well decide, and hopefully no one will hold me to these particular comments, because the committee should decide and make those recommendations to cabinet, who will make the ultimate decision. But you may very well decide tomorrow that the person who is a particular real estate agent or a particular job in that particular industry may have to be Caymanian only. It could be any particular job out there that is identified that it is for Caymanians only.
All right, stick a pin there. I think we have a caller. Thank you for calling Talk with the Nation. Do you have a question or a comment for our guests in studio?
Yes, good afternoon or good. First, I congratulate you, Miss Donna, at this program. I think it's a wonderful program, and I really, it's a pleasure to hear from two wonderful Emily, Mr. Ellio Solomon and Mr.